So let's just say it out loud. Loneliness sucks. It's awkward, it's painful, and if we're being really honest, it makes us feel like we're the only ones standing outside the party while everyone else is inside, laughing and clinking glasses. And yet, loneliness is everywhere. We are more connected than ever. Phones in our hands, notifications buzzing, hundreds of friends online, and somehow we're also more disconnected than we've ever been. It's like we're starving for real connection, but filling up on junk food relationships that leave us empty. So today we're going to talk about breaking through loneliness, not just numbing it, not just scrolling past it, but actually pushing through it to build real, meaningful connection in a world that sometimes feels like it's designed to keep us apart. And to do that, we need to get real about 5 things, 5 truths that might sting a little, but will also set us free. You ready? Let's go. A few years ago, I was at this dinner party, the kind where everyone seems to already know each other. People were laughing, clinking their glasses, deep in conversations that I was absolutely not a part of. And in that moment, I felt it, that sharp, sinking feeling of being completely invisible. So naturally, I did what any emotionally evolved adult would do. I pulled out my phone and pretended to be busy. I stared at my screen like I had just received a life-changing email from Oprah herself. I wasn't busy. I was hiding. I was doing that thing we all do, pulling back the moment we feel unseen, the moment loneliness creeps in. Because here's the truth. Loneliness isn't just the absence of people. It's the absence of being truly seen. And being seen, well, that's terrifying. See, real connection requires us to put ourselves out there. It asks us to walk into a room, sit at a table, or open our mouths and say something before we're 100% sure we'll be welcomed. That's hard. It's risky. It's vulnerable. But let's talk about what happens when we don't take that risk. When we choose to shrink ourselves, to stay quiet, to retreat into the safety of busy and fine, we don't just protect ourselves from potential rejection. We also cut ourselves off from belonging. Because belonging doesn't happen when we blend in. It happens when we have the courage to let ourselves be seen. Awkward, imperfect, and real. I know, it sounds great in theory, but in practice, it's messy, it's uncomfortable. And let's be honest, it feels like walking into the middle school cafeteria all over again, hoping someone lets you sit at their table. So what do? We start small. We make eye contact instead of looking at our phones. We ask the person next to us, how's your day going, instead of assuming they don't want to talk. We remind ourselves that most people aren't intentionally ignoring us. They're just caught up in their own world, maybe even feeling the same loneliness we are. And most of all, we resist the urge to believe the lie that says, you don't matter. No one wants to connect with you, because that's exactly what it is. A lie. That night at the dinner party, I made a choice. I put my phone away, I took a deep breath, and I turned to the person next to me and said, so, do you also feel like everyone here has known each other since birth? She burst out laughing. And just like that, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. Not because someone magically pulled me into the conversation, but because I made the choice to show up. And that's where connection begins. Once I was sitting in a coffee shop, scrolling through my phone, absolutely convinced that I was being social. I was checking Instagram, watching people's stories, even sending a few texts. So in my mind, I was connected. But then I looked up. The place was full of people, laughing, talking, leaning in to share stories. And I realized something that hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't actually with anyone. I was just near people. And that's when it clicked. Being around people isn't the same as feeling connected to people. We live in a world where we can be surrounded by people 24/7, at work, at the gym, on social media, and still feel profoundly alone. And what's worse, we don't always know why we feel lonely. We think, how can I be lonely when I just spent the whole day around people? Or I have 500 people who would like my post, but I don't feel like I have anyone to call when I'm really struggling. It's because proximity isn't connection. Real connection, the kind that makes us feel seen, heard, and like we belong, doesn't happen just because we share a space with someone. It happens when we share ourselves with someone. It happens in those moments where we put the phone down, look someone in the eye and say, how are you, really, and actually listen to the answer. And I get it. It's easier to stay in the safe zone, to be around people without actually letting ourselves connect with them. It feels less risky because here's the thing, real connection requires presence. And presence means we can't hide. We can't half listen while crafting the perfect response in our heads. We can't skim the surface of conversations and expect to feel deeply known. We have to show up fully. We have to be willing to engage, even when it's uncomfortable. One of the loneliest times in my life was when I was traveling constantly for work. I was always surrounded by people, colleagues, clients, strangers in airport lounges, but I felt completely disconnected. And the irony, I was getting so many texts from friends saying, looks like you're having the time of your life, because that's exactly what it looked like. I was posting the highlight reel, the hotel views, the exciting cities, but no one saw the part where I ate dinner alone in my hotel room night after night. Because that's what we do, right? We create the illusion of connection instead of actually building it. We post, we like, we comment, but deep down we're still craving something more. And let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with social media, with casual conversations, or with having a lot of acquaintances. But when we mistake being around people for being connected to people, we end up feeling emptier than ever. So what do? We get intentional. We stop assuming that scrolling equals socializing. We make eye contact, we put down our phones during conversations, we stop settling for surface level interactions and start asking better questions, the kind that invite real answers, not just polite ones. And most of all, we remind ourselves that deep connection isn't about the number of people in our lives. It's about the depth of the relationships we invest in. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to just be around people. I want to be with them. I want to feel known. And that only happens when we stop confusing proximity with connection and start choosing to show up fully present for the people in front of us. Raise your hand if you love being vulnerable. No one? Yeah, me neither. Vulnerability is terrifying. It feels like walking into a room without armor, like handing someone the most fragile part of yourself and just hoping they don't drop it. And if you've ever opened up to someone and been met with indifference, or worse, judgment, you know exactly why we avoid it. Vulnerability feels like standing on stage, heart wide open, hoping no one in the audience is holding a rotten tomato. But here's the problem. Real connection only happens when we let ourselves be seen. The messy parts, the struggles, the parts we'd rather keep hidden because they make us feel too much or not enough. And yet we spend so much time trying to curate ourselves, smoothing out our rough edges so we seem put together. We show up with pre-rehearsed answers, with conversations that skim the surface, with perfectly filtered versions of ourselves, because it feels safer that way. I get it. I really do. I once spent an entire evening at a dinner party answering every "how are you?" with a bright "oh, I'm great," even though in reality I was going through one of the hardest seasons of my life. I had convinced myself that no one wanted to hear about my struggles, that keeping things light and pleasant was the better option. But by the end of the night, I felt lonelier than when I arrived, because that's what happens when we refuse to be vulnerable. We don't just protect ourselves from rejection, we also block ourselves from connection. Think about the people you feel closest to, the ones you trust, the ones you can call in the middle of the night without apologizing. What makes those relationships different? It's not just time, it's depth. It's the fact that at some point you stopped pretending and you started telling the truth. We think vulnerability makes us weaker, but the opposite is true. Vulnerability is the bridge to belonging. It's the moment we say, I don't have it all together, and someone else says, oh, thank God, me neither. But here's the tricky part. Vulnerability is a risk, and risks come with no guarantees. There will be moments when we share something real, something raw, and it isn't met with the response we hoped for. There will be times when people don't understand, when they change the subject or offer us an at least instead of real empathy. And that hurts. It really does. But the alternative, living behind a mask, keeping everything surface level, pretending we're fine when we're not, that hurts more. So the real question is, are we willing to risk discomfort for the sake of real connection? because that's what's at stake here. Vulnerability is the price of admission for real belonging. And I wish I could tell you there was a shortcut, that you could build deep relationships without ever feeling exposed, but there isn't. So we start small. We choose one conversation, one moment to tell the truth instead of deflecting. We push past the fear that says, what if they don't get it? And lean into the possibility that they might. We remind ourselves that the people worth having in our lives, the ones who will truly see us, don't need us to be perfect. They just need us to be real. Because at the end of the day, loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about feeling unknown. And the only way to be known is to show up, imperfect, uncertain, and willing to be seen. Okay, real talk. How many of us have ever thought if they really cared, they'd reach out? Yeah, me too. I used to believe that if someone truly wanted me in their life, I wouldn't have to remind them. I wouldn't have to be the one sending the first text, the one making the plans, the one reaching out. I convinced myself that real friendships, real connections didn't need effort. They just happened naturally. And so when people got busy, when texts went unanswered, when invitations stopped coming, I took it as proof that I wasn't as important to them as I thought. But here's what I've learned. Everyone is waiting. We are all walking around hoping someone will see us, reach out to us, make us feel like we matter. And at the same time, we're terrified of being the one who reaches out first. Because what if we're met with silence? What if we're the only ones who care? It's this weird, painful paradox. We crave connection, but we're also deeply afraid of rejection. So we wait. We tell ourselves that if someone really wanted us in their life, they'd prove it. And in doing so, we create the very loneliness we're trying to avoid. I was stuck in that mindset for a long time. I'd scroll through my phone, see names of people I missed, people I wanted to talk to, but instead of reaching out, I'd sit there feeling hurt that they hadn't reached out first. I'd play this passive game hoping someone else would make the move so I wouldn't have to risk feeling like I was too much. And then one day, I got a text from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. It was simple. Hey, I miss you. Want to grab coffee? And you know what? I didn't think, wow, she must be really desperate for friendship if she's reaching out first. No. I thought, oh my gosh, she was thinking about me. She cares. That moment changed something in me. Because if I felt that way when she reached out, then maybe, just maybe, the people I was missing would feel the same if I made the first move. So I started trying something different. When I thought of someone, instead of wondering why they hadn't texted me, I just texted them. If I missed someone, instead of assuming they were too busy, I invited them to coffee. If I was feeling disconnected, instead of sitting in my own loneliness, I reached out. And you know what happened? People responded. Not always immediately, not always with a perfect, yes, let's hang out tomorrow, but with gratitude. Because just like me, they were waiting. They were afraid of being the one who cared more. That's the thing about connection. It's a two-way street. But sometimes we have to be the ones who step into traffic first. I won't pretend it's easy. It's vulnerable. It's risky. There will be moments when we reach out and don't get the response we hope for. There will be friendships that don't deepen, relationships that don't last. But the alternative, sitting back, waiting, hoping someone will prove our worth by making the first move, that's lonelier. So here's the challenge. Be the one who goes first. Send the text, make the call, say, hey, I miss you. Not because you're desperate, not because you need validation, but because connection is built by the people who have the courage to create it. And I promise you, 9 times out of 10, the other person is waiting too. Let's talk about one of the biggest myths about connection. The idea that it should always feel good. That if we find the right people, the right community, the right relationships, we'll never feel lonely again. That connection, when it's real, should be effortless. I used to believe that. I thought if a friendship or a relationship was meant to be, it would always feel warm and affirming and easy. That when I finally found my people, I wouldn't have to worry about misunderstandings, awkward moments, or feeling like an outsider. But let's be real. Connection is messy. It's imperfect. It's full of moments where we misread each other, let each other down, or say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And if we don't expect that, if we believe connection should always feel seamless, then the first moment it doesn't, we start to pull away. We think, maybe I don't belong here after all. Maybe these aren't my people. But the truth is, real connection isn't about never feeling lonely. It's about knowing that loneliness will show up and still choosing to stay in the mess of human relationships anyway. A while back, I was at a gathering where I should have felt completely at home. These were my people I loved, people who loved me. But for some reason, I felt off. Like I wasn't really connecting, like I was watching from the outside instead of being in the middle of it all. And my instinct to pull back, to retreat, to convince myself that maybe I didn't belong as much as I thought I did, but then I caught myself. Because I know this pattern. I've seen it in myself and in so many others. Loneliness doesn't always mean we're disconnected. Sometimes it just means we're human. We will all have moments where we feel out of sync, where we feel unseen, where we wonder if we truly fit in. And if we let those moments define us, if we take that feeling of disconnection as proof that we don't belong, we rob ourselves of the relationships that could have been stronger if we just stuck around a little longer. Because connection isn't about never feeling lonely. It's about choosing to stay, even when loneliness whispers, maybe you don't matter here. It's about recognizing that relationships take work. Not just in the beginning when everything is new and exciting, but over and over again as we navigate the realities of being flawed humans trying to love other flawed humans. So what does that look like? It looks like staying at the party 5 minutes longer, even when you feel awkward. It looks like reaching out to a friend after a hard conversation instead of assuming the worst. It looks like reminding yourself that just because you feel disconnected in a moment doesn't mean you don't belong in the bigger picture. And it looks like giving yourself grace. Because we are wired for connection, but that doesn't mean we always get it right. We will have lonely days. We will have moments where we feel misunderstood. And that's not a sign that we don't belong. It's just a sign that we're showing up. Because real belonging isn't about never feeling lonely. It's about choosing to stay, to keep reaching out, to keep believing that connection is worth the risk. Even when it's messy, even when it's imperfect, even when it doesn't feel easy. So here's my challenge for you. What's one small way you can choose connection today? Maybe it's texting a friend. Maybe it's making eye contact with the barista instead of looking at your phone. Maybe it's telling someone, hey, I'm really glad you're in my life. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be real. Because at the end of the day, connection isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about choosing to show up, awkward, uncertain, and beautifully human. And I promise you, when we do that, loneliness doesn't stand a chance.